Hi, this is Grandma, and I am reading The Hiding Place, and I'm going to start in the middle of Chapter 7. I only read the first half of Chapter 7. Um, and the first part of the chapter was about them preparing to have people stay at their, Jews stay at their house. And there were a couple of incidents that they describe in here. One was about their friend, the bulldog, and his wife going to a house that had a lot of young people in it who were very loud and drew the attention of the Gestapo. And although Cato, the wife, was released, she was a Christian, her husband was not, and he was taken off. And another instance where there was a woman with a baby, and she was brought to their home, and because the baby couldn't stay quiet when it needed to, they were taken to a farm, and they also were sent off to a camp. But we still don't know why the chapter is called Eusie, E-U-S-I-E. So hopefully this next section will tell us why. Although we had a friend at the telephone exchange, we could never be sure that our line was not tapped. So we developed a system for coding our underground messages in terms of watches. We have a women's watch here that needs repairing, but I can't find a mainspring. Do you know who might have one? That means we have a Jewish woman in need of a hiding place, and we can't find one among our regular contacts. I have a watch here with a face that's causing difficulty. One of the numbers has worked loose and it's holding back the hand. Do you know anyone who does this kind of repair work? And this meant we have a Jew here whose features are especially Semitic. Do you know anyone who would be willing to take an extra risk? I'm sorry, but the child's watch, which you left with us, is not repairable. Do you have the receipt? A Jewish child has died in one of our houses. We need a burial permit. One morning in the middle of June, the telephone rang with this message. We have a man's watch here that's giving us trouble. We can't find anyone to repair it. For one thing, the face is very old-fashioned. So, a Jew whose features gave him away. This was the hardest kind of person to place. Send the watch over and I'll see what we can do in our own shop, I said. Promptly at 7 that evening, the side doorbell rang. I glanced at the mirror in the window of the dining room where we were still sitting over tea of rose leaves and cherry stems. Even from the side of his head, I could tell that this was our old-fashioned watch. His form, his clothes, his stance were music hall comedy Jewish. I ran down to the door. Do come in. The smiling, slender man in his early 30s with his protruding ears, balding head, and minuscule glasses gave an elaborate bow. I liked him instantly. Once the door was closed, he took out a pipe. The very first thing I must ask, he said, is whether or not I should leave behind my good friend the pipe. Meyer Moselle and his pipe are not easily separated, but for you, kind lady, should the smell get into your drapes, I would gladly say goodbye to my friend nicotine. I laughed. Of all the Jews who had come to our house, this was the first to enter gaily, and with a question about our own comfort. Of course you may keep your pipe, I said. My father smokes a cigar when he can get one these days. Ah, these days. Meyer Moselle raised arms and shoulders in an enormous shrug like this. What do you expect when the barbarians have overrun the camp? I took him to the dining room. There were 7 seated at the table, a Jewish couple awaiting placement, and 3 underground workers, in addition to Father and Betsy. Meyer Moselle's eyes went straight to Father. But, he cried, one of the patriarchs! It was exactly the right thing to say to Father. But, he returned with equal good humor, a brother of the chosen people. Can you recite the 166th Psalm, Opa? Meyer said. Father beamed. Of course, there is no Psalm 166. The Psalter stops with 150. It must be a joke, and nothing could please Father better than a scriptural joke. The 166th Psalm. Shall I recite it for you? Meyer asked. Father gave a bow of assent, and Meyer plunged into the verse. But that's Psalm 100, Father interrupted, and then his face lit up. Of course. Psalm 66 started with the identical words. Meyer had asked for the 100th and the 66th Psalm. For the rest of the evening, I could hear Father chuckling. Psalm 166. So there is no Psalm 166, but 166, when added together, make 166. At 8:45, Father took the old brass-bound Bible from its shelf. He opened to the reading in Jeremiah, where we had left off the night before. Then, with sudden inspiration, passed the Bible across the table to Meyer. I would consider it an honor if you would read tonight, Father said. Lifting the book lovingly, Meyer rose to his feet. From a pocket came a small prayer cap, and then from deep in his throat, half sung, half pleaded, came the words of the ancient prophet. So feelingly, so achingly, that we seemed to hear the cry of the exile itself. Meyer Moselle, he told us afterward, had been cantor in the synagogue in Amsterdam. Now, the cantor in a synagogue is a little bit like if we had one person who was always the liturgist in our church, who always read from the Bible. And the cantors usually have very beautiful voices, and they have a way of almost singing they do sing the scripture. For all his lightheartedness, he had suffered much. Most of his family had been arrested. His wife and children were in hiding on a farm in the north, which had declined to accept Meyer for obvious reasons, he said with a grimace at his own unmistakable features. And gradually it dawned on all of us that this endearing man was to stay at the Bayeux. It was certainly not an ideal place, but for Meyer, nothing could be ideal right now. At least, I told him one evening, your name doesn't have to give you away too. Ever since the days when Willem was studying church history, I had remembered the venerable 4th century church father Eusebius. I think we'll call you Eusebius, I decided. We were sitting in Tante Jan's front room with Keek and some other young men who had made us delivery of forged travel permits too late to get home by curfew. Meyer leaned back and stared at the ceiling pensively. He took his pipe out of his mouth. Eusebius Moselle, he said, tasting the words. No, it doesn't sound right. Eusebius Gentile Moselle. We all laughed. Don't be a goose, Betsy said. You must change both names. Keek looked slyly at Father. Opa, how about Smit? That seems a popular name these days. It does seem so, said Father, not catching the joke. Extraordinarily popular. And Eusebius Smith it became. Changing Meyer's name was easy. At once he became Eusie. Ah, that's where the name of the chapter came from. But getting Eusie to eat non-kosher food was something else. The problem, of course, was that we were grateful for food of any kind. We stood in line for hours, the 3rd year of the occupation, to get whatever was available. One day, the paper announced that coupon number 4 was good for pork sausage. It was the first meat we'd had in weeks. Lovingly, Betsy prepared the feast, saving every drop of fat for flavoring other foods later. "Eusie," Betsy said, as she carried the steaming casserole of pork and potatoes to the table, "the day has come." Eusie knocked the ashes out of his pipe and considered his plight out loud. He who had always eaten kosher, he, the oldest son of the oldest son of a respected family. In fact, he, Meyer Moselle Eusebius Smith, was seriously being asked to eat pork. Betsy placed a helping of sausage and potato before him. Bon appetit! The tantalizing odor reached our meat-starved palates. Eusie wet his lips with his tongue. "Of course," he said, "there's a provision for this in the Talmud." He speared the meat with his fork, bit hungrily, and rolled his eyes heavenly in pure pleasure. "And I'm going to start hunting for it too, just as soon as dinner is over." As if Eusie's arrival had broken down a last hesitation, within a week there were 3 new permanent residences to the household. First, there was Job, our current apprentice, whose daily trip from his parents' home in the suburbs had twice nearly ended in seizure for the factory transport. The second time it happened, his parents asked if he could stay at the Bayet, and we agreed. The other 2 were Henk, a young lawyer, and Leandert, a schoolteacher. Leandert made an especially important contribution to the secret life of the Bayet. He installed our electric warning system. By now, I had learned to make the nighttime trip out to Pickwick's almost as skillfully as Keek. One evening, when I'd gratefully accepted a cup of coffee, my wall-eyed friend, that's Pickwick, sat me down for a lecture. "Cornelia," he said, settling his bulk in a velvet chair too small for him, "I understand you have no alarm system in your house. That is purest folly. Also, I'm given to believe that you are not carrying out regular drills for our guests." I was always amazed at how well Pickwick knew what went on at the Bayet. "You know that a raid may come any day," Pickwick continued. "I don't see how you can avoid one. Scores of people in and out, and an NSB agent living over on Khan's up the street. Your secret room is no good to you if people can't get to it in time. I know this Leandert. He's a good man and a very passable electrician. Get him to put a buzzer in every room with a door or window on the street. Then hold practice drills until your people can disappear in that room without a trace in less than a minute. I'll send someone to get you started." Leander did the electrical work that weekend. He installed a buzzer near the top of the stairs, loud enough to be heard all over the house but not outside. Then he placed buttons to sound the buzzer at every vantage point where trouble might first be spotted. One button went beneath the dining room windowsill, just below the mirror which gave onto the side door. Another went in the downstairs hall just inside the door, and a third inside the front door on the Bartoljurestraat. He also put a button behind the counter in the shop, and one in each workbench as well beneath the windows in Tante Jan's rooms. We were ready for our first trial run. The 4 unacknowledged members of our household were already climbing up the secret room 2 times a day, in the morning to store their night clothes, beddings, and toilet articles, and in the evening to put away their day things. Members of our group, too, who had to spend the night, kept raincoats, hats, anything they'd brought with them in that room. Altogether, that made a good deal of traffic in and out of my small bedroom, smaller now indeed by nearly a yard. Many nights my last waking sight would be Eusie in a long robe and tasseled nightcap hanging his day clothes through the secret panel. But the purpose of the drills was to see how rapidly people could reach the room at any hour of the day or night without prior notice. A sallow-faced young man arrived from Pickwick one morning to teach me how to conduct the drills. "Smith!" Father exclaimed when the man introduced himself. "Truly, it's most astonishing. We've had one Smith after another lately. Now, you bear a great resemblance to..." Mr. Smith disentangled himself gently from Father's genealogical inquiries and followed me upstairs. "Mealtimes," he said, "that's a favorite hour for a raid. Also the middle of the night." He strode from room to room, pointing everywhere to evidence that more than 3 people lived in the house. Watch wastebaskets and ashtrays. He paused in a bedroom door. If the raid comes at night, they must not only take their sheets and blankets, but get the mattress turned. That's the SD's favorite trick, feeling for a warm spot on the bed. Mr. Smith stayed for lunch. There were 11 of us at the table that day, including a Jewish lady who had arrived the night before, and a Gentile woman and her small daughter, members of our underground, who acted as escorts. The 3 of them were leaving for a farm in Brabant right after lunch. Betsy had just passed around a stew so artfully prepared you'd scarcely miss the meat, when, without warning, Mr. Smith leaned back in his chair and pushed the button below the window. Above us, the buzzer sounded. People sprang to their feet, snatching up glasses and plates, scrambling for the stairs, while the cat clawed halfway up the curtain in consternation. Cries of "Faster, not so loud, and you're spilling it," reached us as Father, Betsy, and I hastily rearranged table and chairs to look like a lunch for 3 in progress. "No, leave my place," Mr. Smith instructed. "Why shouldn't you have a guest for lunch? The lady and the little girl could have stayed too." At last we were seated again and silence reigned upstairs. The whole process had taken 4 minutes. A little later, we were all gathered around, and around the dining room table, Mr. Smith set out before him the incriminating evidence he had found: 2 spoons and a piece of carrot on the stairs, pipe ashes in an unoccupied bedroom. Everyone looked at Eusie, who blushed to the tips of his large ears. "Also those," he pointed to the hats of mother and daughter, still dangling from the pegs in the dining room wall. "If you have to hide, stop and think what you arrived with, besides which you're all simply too slow." The next night, I sounded the alarm again, and this time we shaved 1:33 off our run. But our 5th trial, we were down to 2 minutes. We never did achieve Pickwick's ideal of under a minute. But with practice, we learned to jump up from whatever we were doing and get those who had to hide in the secret room in 70 seconds. Father, Toos, and I worked on stalling techniques, which we would use if the Gestapo came through the shop door. Betsy invented a similar strategy for the side door. With those delaying techniques, we hoped we could gain a life-saving 70 ticks out of a second hand, another 70 seconds. Beside the drills struck so close to the fear that haunted each of our guests, never spoken, always present, we tried to keep these times from becoming too serious, like a game. We'd tell each other, a race to beat our own record. One of our group owned the bakery in the next street. Early in the month, I would deposit a supply of sugar coupons with him. Then when I decided it was time for a drill, I would go to him for a bag of cream puffs, an inexpressible treat in those sweetless days, to be secreted in my workbench and brought out as a reward for a successful practice. Each time the order of cream puffs was larger, for by now, in addition to the workers we wanted to initiate into the system, we had 3 more permanent boarders: Thea DaCosta, Meta Monsanto, and Mary Italia. Mary Italia, at 76, the oldest of our guests, was also the one who posed the greatest problem. The moment Mary stepped through our door, I heard the asthmatic wheezing, which had made other hosts unwilling to take her in. Since her ailment compromised the safety of the others, we took up the problem in caucus. The 7 most concerned, Eusie, Job, Henk, Leandert, Maida, Thea, and Mary herself, joined Father, Betsy, and me in Tante Jan's front room. There is no sense in pretending, I began. Mary has a difficulty, especially after climbing stairs, that could put you all in danger. In the silence that followed, Mary's labored breathing seemed especially loud. Can I speak? Eusie asked. Of course. It seems to me that we're all in your house because of some difficulty or other. We are the orphan children, the ones nobody else wanted. Any one of us jeopardizing all the others. I vote that Mary stay. Good, said Lawyer Henk. Let's put it to the vote. Hands began rising, but Mary was struggling to speak. Secret ballots, she brought out at last. No one should be embarrassed. Henk brought a sheet of paper from the desk in the next room and tore it into 9 small strips. You too, he said, handing ballots to Betsy, Father, and me. If we're discovered, you suffer the same as us. He handed around pencils. Mark no if it's too great a risk. Yes if you think she belongs here. For a moment the pencils scratched. Then Henk collected the folded ballots. He opened them in silence, then reached over and dropped them into Mary's lap. 9 little scraps of paper, 9 times the word yes. And so our family was formed. Others stayed with us a day or a week, but these 7 remained, the nucleus of our happy household. That it could have been happy at such a time and in such circumstances was largely a tribute to Betsy. Because our guests' physical lives were so very restricted, evenings under Betsy's direction became the door to the wide world. Sometimes we had concerts with Leandert on the violin and Thea, a truly accomplished musician, on the piano. Or Betsy would announce an evening of Vondel, the Dutch Shakespeare, with each of us reading a part. One night a week, she talked Eusie into giving Hebrew lessons. Another night, Meta taught Italian. The evening's activities had to be kept brief because the city now had electricity only a short while each night. And candles had to be hoarded for emergencies. When the lamps flickered and dimmed, we would wind back down to the dining room where my bicycle was set up on its stand, and one of us would climb onto it, and others taking chairs, and then while the rider pedaled furiously to make the headlight grow bright, someone would pick up the chapter from the night before. We changed cyclist and reader often as legs or voice grew tired, reading our way through histories, novels, or plays. Father always went upstairs after prayers at 9:15, but the rest of us lingered, reluctant to break the circle, sorry to see the evening end. Oh well, Eusie would say hopefully as we started at last to our room. Maybe there'll be drill tonight. I haven't had a cream puff in nearly a week. I can see why the chapter's named for him. What a wonderful man he is. He's always so optimistic and positive. Puts all of them at ease. Here's a photo of the Bayet family in 1943. It doesn't say who's who, other than Corrie, Father, and Betsy are there with Jewish guests. Another photo that was in this chapter was of 2 Jewish women during an actual drill of the hiding place in 1943. Now, what they had done is they had built a wall out, put a bookshelf in part of it, and under the bookshelf at the bottom of the bookshelf was a panel, and it was in that panel that people would go to the room. So there's no real door, but a panel down here below the rest of the bookshelf for them to crawl in. Okay, that's all for now. The next chapter is called Storm Clouds Gather, which has been happening to me this afternoon. But this is a metaphor for something else is going to happen. So we'll have to wait and see. Bye-bye.